Hello and welcome to The Content Bite, a podcast for freelancers who use their words to make money. I'm Rachel Smith, a freelance journalist, copywriter and content producer. I'm also the founder of Rachel's List, a jobs board and community for Australian writers and other creatives.
And I'm Lynne Testoni. I'm a journalist and content writer as well. Rachel and I are your weekly co-hosts, and every week we bring you all kinds of tips, tricks and some fabulous guests to help you make the most of your freelance business.
Many writers don't realise just how much their time is really worth, and we waste a lot of time doing things that can be automated. That's why I love Rounded. It tracks invoices so I don't have to remember who's paid and who needs chasing up. And when I started using Rounded, I realised how much time I'd been wasting on admin, literally hours every week. Now it takes me about 2 minutes to send an invoice.
Yeah, and it's worth knowing that you can try Rounded for free. And if you're a gold member of Rachel's List, you're in luck. You can save 20% on any annual Rounded plan. Hi, Rach, how are you?
I'm good. I'm having a good week.
Oh, good. So am I. But before we start chatting with our guest, who I'm very excited about, I just wanted to give another shout out to the Content Bite Summit and remind you that even if you can't get to Sydney, we have virtual tickets available, and it's a great way to hear all the speakers from the comfort of your own home.
Yes, we're getting a few more virtual tickets now, but also we're getting a few more VIP tickets being snapped up by people who are very excited about being on the helipad.
Yes.
It's not all about the cocktail party, of course.
Of course not.
Nice sweetener. Yes.
But of course, we love the fact that the podcast, which is where it all started, goes on again. And this week we have another inspiring writer to chat to, freelance journalist Susan Horsburgh. So here's a little bit about Susan. So Susan Horsburgh has been a journalist for 30 years, starting out as a cadet on the Australian newspaper. I was a cadet too back in the day, Susan, a few years before. Since then, she's worked for leading Australian and international publications, including Time magazine in Sydney and London, and People in New York. That's a great gig.
Wow.
Writing about everything from arts, entertainment and design to business, health and social affairs. Now she's a freelance journalist and she writes mostly for Good Weekend magazine, the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, the Australian Women's Weekly and Qantas magazine, as well as for corporate clients.
Wow. Welcome, Susan.
Yeah, so welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I've definitely seen your byline before, and I'm really excited to talk about some of the places that you write for. So this is very exciting.
So tell us a little bit about your career. So how did you start and what have been some of the highlights?
Well, I started in the early 90s fetching coffees as a copy kid at News Limited in Surrey Hills in Sydney. After a few months, thankfully, I got a cadetship with the Australian and worked across the newspaper for the next 5 years. I landed very happily in the arts department, which was one of my all-time favourite jobs. But probably the highlight of my time at the paper was the 5 weeks I spent in Kenya in refugee camps during the war in South Sudan.
Wow.
Yeah, I was there reporting on violence against women, and that was pretty life-changing. In 97, I became a staff writer for Time magazine in Sydney and later went to London and worked for Time there before moving to New York, where I became a staff writer for People magazine. And, back then it was the magazine's heyday. I think it was the most profitable magazine in the world. It had something like 36 million readers a week. And
gosh.
Yeah. And I spent some time working in special issues, which was great. It meant, I'd come to work and, we'd sit around a boardroom table in the Rockefeller Center, discussing things like, who should be the sexiest man alive. So, that was really fun. And
sounds good.
And I've got to say my knowledge of celebrities at the time was just next level. Like I could tell you the name of George Clooney's pot-bellied pig, that kind of thing. It was Max, by the way. But, that was also the time of, September 11th. So I was living there when that happened. And we obviously wrote a lot about that day and the aftermath, obviously. Yeah, but the fun had to stop at some point. So I came back to Australia and I moved to Melbourne in 2004 to get married and start the breeding program. And that's when I did my first freelancing stint. I wrote primarily for the Weekend Australian magazine and The Age Melbourne Magazine, which was that beautiful glossy.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, it was gorgeous.
That they used to put out. I think there was one in Sydney as well.
Yeah.
But in 2010, though, I got lucky and joined the Australian Women's Weekly as a senior staff writer, and that was working from home in Melbourne. And that was pretty much my dream job. I was there for more than 7.5 years and, interviewed a range of people like, Gordon Ramsay, Tim Minchin, Kim Kardashian, and lots of, fascinating non-celebrities as well. And I really loved that job. But at the end of 2017, the staff writing roles were made redundant, and I have been freelancing ever since. As you said, mostly for Good Weekend, Qantas, and The Weekly.
Wow. So I know you mentioned, I think Lynne mentioned in your bio that you work for some corporate clients, but it sounds like you survive solely as a freelance journalist, or pretty much. Is that right? How is that?
Well, I mean, I'm not the main breadwinner in my family, and and there's no way I could be with the work I do, which is mostly for magazines. Budgets are tight. Word rates haven't changed for more than 20 years, and the word rate system is inherently flawed because there isn't necessarily any correlation between the number of words in a story and the time it takes to write it.
So true.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell you that, a 2,000 word story could be a one interview profile, or it could be a social issues feature that requires a dozen interviews and weeks of research and reporting. And, either way, you get paid the same thing. And, in any other industry that would be considered bizarre, not getting paid for the time you work, but it's just the reality with newspapers and magazines. And I think the only way you can make freelancing work financially is if you do mostly corporate writing. And, I definitely love to do more of that.
Yeah. Do you ever push back? Like if you are going to do a 2,000 word story and there are a dozen interviews involved and more work and all of that, do you push back, or do you just know that the money's not there, the budget's not there?
Well, I think I get paid pretty well for
the industry.
Yes, what I get paid is probably the most I could ask for. I'm aware of that. I do ask sometimes if there's any kind of room for movement, but there's a lot of people getting paid a lot less than I am in terms of bid rate. So I'm aware of that.
Do you miss that full-time salary though?
Absolutely. I totally miss that. I would really love to have money coming into my account every 2 weeks. That would be brilliant. I would love superannuation. I would love
holiday pay.
That would be brilliant. Yes, absolutely.
I hate having to take that super out of my money. Annoys me.
Yeah, you feel really cheated, don't you?
It just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, the amount in your account. Yes.
Well, wait till you're my age, and then you realise I should have done more of that.
I didn't start taking super out until my 30s, which is such a bad idea. If anyone is listening and they don't have any super, please start now.
And also get your spouse to contribute too if you have, I think. Yeah,
absolutely. I did absolutely again. Sorry, everybody. If you're on our Content Bite Instagram, you'll know that I did a
thing about how often you say it.
How many times I say absolutely. So I'm actually really trying to rein that in. You can all email me later and tell me how many times it was. So anyway, back to Susan. You work for some of the country's most prestigious publications. Is that a dream for you? Is it like, has it been a massive journey getting those publications on your, portfolio?
Oh, well, it was always my dream to be a journalist. When I was 11 or 12, I used to pretend I was Jana Bent and, make my friends sit down and do tell-all interviews. And, back then, especially in the 80s, pre-internet, magazines were a really big deal. They were how you learned what was going on in the world.
Yeah. It was all about the mag.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I used to love Dolly and Cleo, and, the editor of Cleo, Lisa Wilkinson, was my absolute hero. I mean, I once wrote to her when I was a teenager, actually asking for an internship. So, I've always loved magazines.
That's hilarious because I actually worked at Dolly and Cleo with Lisa. So I probably was there. I was
probably fangirling over stuff that you wrote.
Possibly. Well, back to the sexiest man alive. I did a few of the Cleo's 50 bachelors. So yes.
Oh yes. Yeah. You get very good at summing it all up in about 50 to 100 words.
Yes.
super fat, dense little blurbs. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh dear. But Rachel and I are big fans of the Two of Us column and I think it's a bit of a bucket list for many freelancers, and that's in the Good Weekend. How does that work? Tell us a little bit about the process, whether you pitch ideas, whether you get commissioned. Yeah.
The first one I pitched, but pretty much the rest of them have been commissioned. I wrote my first Two of Us 5 years ago, and since then I've done about 30 of them.
Wow.
I mean, the column's been around for more than 30 years. I think it's one of the most popular sections of the magazine. And, sometimes people say, oh, I thought the two people just wrote them themselves. And that just makes me want to weep, because it can be quite tricky and time consuming to write. You have to interview the two people separately. Usually you do the chattiest person first, and then you interview them for about an hour or an hour and a half each. So then you've sometimes got a 15,000 word transcript, which you've got to squish down to about 1,100 words. And it's got to be in their voice, but in a vaguely chronological, coherent form. And, with that column, it's all about the interview and capturing that detail, like funny anecdotes and memories that, either illustrate the character of the other person or the nature of the relationship. So, and you also want to talk to them about what they don't like about each other, which is why I like interviewing spouses or parents and children, because they usually let rip about that kind of thing, whereas friends are usually a bit too polite to talk about the other's shortcomings. But yeah, I mean, Two of Us stories, they take a while to do, but I really never get sick of doing them, because it's just really nice hearing what people mean to each other. It can be really beautiful.
Yeah. Do you keep a list of, like, when you're meeting people, whether they would be good options for the column? I know you mentioned most are commissioned though. So the magazine obviously has a long list that they're going through.
Yes. Yeah. They have an editor of the page who kind of vets them to make sure that that they're suitable. So then, then they'll come to me and, especially if they're obviously in Melbourne, they'll ask me to do those.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite Two of Us columns that you've worked on? Ones you'll never forget.
I interviewed a really great pair of twins. Well, it makes sense that they're a pair. 90-year-old Italian twins last year, and they were just hilarious. They, had lived through the war, lived through bombings. They, had moved to Australia together, and they were just full of different little anecdotes, and they were fantastic value. Peter Alexander, the Pajama King, and his mum were really good too. They were great.
I remember that story. It was great. Very engaging.
Yes, and they were great. Also, Christian White, actually, and his partner Christian White's a novelist, and his partner, they were great because they were just so honest. She was really, really candid about how jealous she had been when he had all this incredible success, because he became a best-selling writer, and that was great, because she was just really honest, and that made for a really great Two of Us too, I thought.
I would love to know how, I mean, for something like that, 15 words distilled down to 1,100 words, and it's such a personal thing for those two people. How does copy approval work on that score? Do they see it? I mean, do you get them becoming very gun shy about what they've said, and how do you manage that?
They don't
see it. No.
If there's something that someone says that I think, oh, that might be hurtful to the other person, I might call them and just say, basically save them from themselves, I guess.
Yeah.
And just say, look, do you really want to say that? Do you want to soften it or something like that? But generally, no, they don't see it.
Wow. That's amazing.
Have any ever come back and said, I didn't like that, or I was a bit upset that went in, or something like that?
Yeah, only once though, from the 30. I think it was a pair of friends, and one of them said something slightly disparaging about the friend's husband, and the friend's husband wasn't happy. But the friend whose husband it was, she knew that she had said even worse herself. So and I would never have even thought that was going to be an issue. So sometimes the things that you worry about, no one is concerned about, and then something else will pop up.
Yeah.
Generally, no, I haven't had any. Generally, most people are really happy to have the chance to talk about someone they love.
Yeah. God, it's such a high pressure gig though, isn't it? I think, with a lot of the content marketing stuff I do, and even a lot of the journalism stuff I do now, the editors, their best practice is you have to read quotes back to everybody, or you have to get approval. I've got to get approval on pretty much everything now before I file.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must make your job really hard.
It's another layer.
Another layer of complexity.
Yeah. It must take up a lot of extra time doing that. And then also you run the risk of them getting gun shy and then having to go back and rewrite. So that sounds hellish.
I basically say to them, this is for accuracy only.
Yeah.
I'm not changing it. I just want to make sure it's completely accurate. And most of them don't do anything, but I know a lot of journos who do experience that, where something has to be completely rewritten, or they take out all the color. They don't want any of the personality in there, and that's really difficult. So it is a tricky one to navigate.
I had a house story recently where it was an absolute nightmare. The person approved the quotes and then obviously spoke to the person that she quoted or talked about, and then wanted the whole thing rewritten and everything, and then emailed the editor directly and all this sort of stuff, and offered to get her best friend in the country town she lived to rewrite it instead of me. It was a nightmare.
Oh my God.
Which is funny because it was the most innocuous story, and in the end it ended up being really bland because she took out all the personality and it was a big issue. But that doesn't happen very often. I think, in the many years I've been doing it, it's probably only the first time that that's happened. So there you are.
So Susan, how long have you been freelancing for now?
Well, this is my second stint of freelancing. So this time I've been freelancing since I left the weekly. So that's been 5.5 years now. Yeah.
And what do you like about it? And what do you hate about it?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious what I hate about it. But I mean, in terms of the upsides, you can't really beat it for freedom and flexibility. And, especially when you've got 3 kids, which I have. It's great to be able to take time off when you need it. And it also means you can write the stories that you're interested in too, which is an added bonus.
So we talk a lot about finding clients on this podcast, and obviously this is partly not just clients as in corporate, but in editors. How have you found your gigs? Was it hard at the beginning? I guess with the weekly, you probably had those initial connections. How did it work?
Yeah, I did. And also by the time I started freelancing the first time, which was in 2004 when I came back to Australia, I'd been writing for 12 years. So I had a lot of good clips, and I'd worked for editors who could vouch for me. And I think that's mostly how I've managed to get work as a freelancer, through contacts. And it's been editors referring me to other editors. And there's also a lot to be said for meeting editors for a coffee if you can, but just to put your face in front of them and let them know what you're like. And also you've got to be aware that editors that you have a relationship with, eventually move on. So I think you've got to be really cultivating your connections all the time.
Well, you're obviously a very passionate storyteller, and that's at the heart of everything you do. What do you love most about doing that for a job, about writing, about journalism?
Yeah, I just love chatting to people and writing about it. To me, jobs don't get much better than that. Journalism, as you know, gives you access to people and experiences that you'd never ordinarily get to have. And that's always felt like a huge privilege to me. Also, I just love asking people personal questions. So, it's the ideal job for anyone who's essentially really nosy.
I agree.
It would probably be much smarter financially if I had a niche, but I love being a generalist, just being able to, follow my curiosity. And I guess the closest thing I'd have to a niche would be profile writing, because I love asking people about their lives. I want to know who they are, what they love, why they do what they do.
Yeah, I'm just the same. I'm a generalist as well. But I love that as well. My son actually famously said to me, he must have been about 4 or 5, and he said, "Mum, why do you talk to everybody that you meet? Even if you don't know them, you just don't even know that person, and you just we're talking to them and having this long conversation." But I can't stop myself. It's like
it's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
Yeah, in post office queues, on planes, it doesn't matter really. Yeah.
Yeah, like yesterday he was in the shower at the aquatic center, and the kid next door was in the shower, and I never met the mum or the kid before. They were in the same class. And the mum was saying, "Oh no, I've left the shampoo at home." And I said, "Here, have ours." And we struck up a conversation. I could just see him rolling his eyes in the shower. Hilarious. You never know who you're going to meet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a bit about what I wanted to ask next is about interviewing, because you must interview people all the time. That seems to be your thing. And it's a real skill. I think sometimes it's underestimated how hard that is. And Rachel and I are such big believers in the importance of the interview. And I think it's especially in this age of AI, because it's something that obviously
sets you apart.
Artificial intelligence can't do.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how you get your subjects to talk and get the best interviews.
I don't think it's that complicated. Just need to be nice. I think it's important to be really well prepared, I think, so they know that you've done your research and you're genuinely interested in them and their work. I always have a very long list of questions, but you've got to really listen, obviously, to their answers. So if they do allude to something, that you can, you ask a follow-up question and see where that goes. And sometimes you just need to be comfortable with silence, because often they'll fill it. It's amazing what people will say if you're quiet and you just wait. It's almost like a game of chicken, really. But, obviously, you don't go in with the tough questions straight up. You've got to ease into the conversation, and it helps if you can find some common ground between you. But also sometimes you've just got to brace yourself and ask an uncomfortable question. The interviewee can always dodge it if they want to, but I think sometimes people don't have the guts to ask the questions that readers would really like to pose. And and they can result in some really interesting answers.
That's so true. I know when I was interviewing celebrities, I think that you might have had a bit of a different experience when you interviewed celebrities. I was on like the weeklies, like TV Week and NW, and there were just wall-to-wall publicists, saying, no, not that question. Next question, whatever. And so everything that came out was this sanitized thing that every, kind of journalist that would only allow a certain amount of questions. So how do you manage with celebrities? Is it trickier? Are they more media savvy?
Yep. I think celebrities can sometimes have rote answers because, they've been asked the same questions so many times. And it's especially frustrating on the odd occasion when their publicist insists on sitting in on the interview.
I hate that.
Yeah, I once interviewed an actress who'd had a lot of recent success in Hollywood, and I asked her about turning 50, and her publicist just basically came across the room and just stopped the interview because she didn't want the actress's age revealed, even though, it had been in other stories and it was really relevant to the weekly.
Probably just have to Google it or look at
exactly. And it was really relevant to the weekly's demographic. I mean, this was a good news story. This was something the readers would be interested in. This was an actress who was turning the whole female invisibility theory on its head, but the publicist got very shirty. And I think probably the best interview subjects are, everyday people who've gone through something extraordinary because, they have a great, meaningful story to tell and they're also less guarded. I remember talking to Rosie Batty for the Women's Weekly 3 weeks after she'd lost her son in the most horrific circumstances. And she was extraordinary. She was just so raw and so open and eloquent and just so generous. And it's a cliche, but I think it's true that most people have a story to tell if you dig deeply enough. I mean, just the other day I interviewed a zookeeper for a Zoos Victoria publication, and she was telling me about the gorillas that she looks after. And she was saying how they love going to sleep listening to Michael Bublé. I mean, I just love interviewing people and hearing, kooky details like that.
Yeah.
That's the best. I eat that stuff up.
Yeah, mate, me too.
So tell us a little bit about how you approach a news story. So where do you find the angle? How do you shape a profile? Because there's a lot of, I guess, sculpting to do with those sort of stories.
Oh, well, with a profile, you're usually interviewing them for a reason, like, they might have a book coming out or something like that. So that will often influence the angle. And, if you've got a couple of hours to chat with them, like you usually do, you can do a pretty wide ranging interview and, just see what comes up in the conversation. But, sometimes though, you don't have much time and you have to be pretty targeted with your angle and your question. I remember earlier this year, I did a cover story on Linda Burney for Sunday Life magazine. And she was really flat out at the time. She was campaigning around the country for the Indigenous voice to Parliament. She didn't have much time for an interview. So I ended up chatting with her when she was on a government plane flight flying from Canberra to Alice Springs on a Thursday night or something. And she only had 20 minutes to spare. And I had to write a cover story from that. So I was pretty nervous about getting what I needed, especially because I'd never written for Sunday Life before. And, the story was pegged to International Women's Day. And, I knew she'd done her first speech to federal parliament in a kangaroo skin cloak that her best friend had made her. So I just decided to make the angle female friendship. So with that 20 minutes, I asked her other questions, but I asked her about her friends and how they'd rallied around her after the deaths of her husband and her son. And she gave me some really lovely quotes. So that ended up working out really well, but sometimes you have even less. Like with Kim Kardashian, I was only given 10 minutes.
Yes.
So, so you really have to go in with a plan. I mean, she was over here, this was years ago, flogging the 7th fragrance or something. And she was in a hotel room at the Crown Casino. It was like that scene out of Notting Hill when Hugh Grant was pretending to work Horse and Hound. And
I love that scene.
Yeah. And she was given 5 minutes to interview Julia Roberts. Anyway, it was just this revolving door of journalists who'd been allotted, 10 minutes each. And, I knew I wouldn't be able to get anything substantial out of her in 10 minutes. In the end, I think I eked out 12 minutes. So, I asked her to give me a selfie taking lesson, because really it was just a ruse to get a selfie with Kim Kardashian. But oh my God, she had a lot to say about taking selfies. Anyway, it made for a fun story. And I posted the picture on Facebook and it just went off. And I actually got more likes for that than I did for any of my newborn babies. So
that's great.
Of all the people to get a lesson on taking a selfie, she's the one. I love that angle. I love it.
We've all had one of those, like running around a hotel room with a dictaphone thing. Mine was with Alicia Keys, and I had 5 minutes before the taxi came to pick her up to the airport. So,
No, they just give you, it's the most ludicrous amount of time that they give you. I once did Denzel Washington, and that was horrific. That was one of those 10-minute deals where you're just scrambling.
Yeah, I've done Miranda Kerr. That's the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it sounds like, you're so experienced. It sounds like editors would mainly come to you. But if you are pitching, what's your secret to getting a pitch over the line?
Yeah, I probably don't pitch as much as I should because it's just easier and more time efficient, I guess, as a freelancer to do the stories you're asked to do. But if it's a long form piece, I do a lot of research to make sure the story's got legs, to make sure it can be carried for 4,000 words or whatever it is. But obviously you have to know the publication and the audience and then make a convincing case, why this story and why now. And then you've got to make it clear how you can make the story fresh and compelling, I guess.
Interesting. One of the things you've mentioned earlier is because you're located in Melbourne. And I wonder if that's an advantage or a disadvantage because so much of Australian media is centred in Sydney. Or do you think it's great, like you say that with The Good Weekend, they often give you things that are Melbourne-based. So do you think it's hard being away from this centre, or do you think it's sometimes one of your secret weapons?
Well, it's probably harder to get a staff job because media does tend to be pretty Sydney-centric. But as a freelancer, I think you can pretty much work anywhere. And, perhaps it helps not to be competing with as many other writers in the same city. When you're freelancing at home alone, you can sometimes feel like you're working in a bit of a vacuum. So I think it's tricky in terms of networks, for a sense of community. I think it really helps to join freelance groups online, like Rachel's List, or make connections through LinkedIn. I mean, self-promotion can feel pretty icky, but you kind of have to get used to posting your stories and putting yourself out there, I think.
I would love to know what your average week is like, maybe some of your processes. If you're doing lots of interviews, are you batching them all or trying to do them in one part of the week and then writing? How does your week work?
I don't really have an average week, actually. It kind of depends on what I'm working on.
That's sometimes nice.
Yeah, but it's usually a mix of researching, interviewing, transcribing, writing. I'm not a very good multitasker. I like to kind of focus on one thing at a time. Yeah, my work day is pretty much dictated by my dog, really. Frank knows me relentlessly at about 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. to make sure we go for walks. So my work day is dictated by him, actually.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I can relate.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about the sort of things you're working on now.
Well, at the moment, for the Women's Weekly, I'm doing a profile of an author who's got a new memoir coming out. So I went and visited her at her house and interviewed her for a couple of hours. I'm also doing a story on another writer and her assistant. And I'm also working on 2 monthly pages that I do for Qantas. One is called Creative Process, which is a short profile of an up-and-coming artist, and the other is Design Notes, which is a page about an iconic design, like a furniture piece, like a Noguchi coffee table or something like that. For Qantas, I also do occasional travel stories. So I just finished a batch of stories that I wrote about Japan because I went there earlier this year.
Oh, lovely.
How fabulous. I just wanted to circle back on the interviewing thing. You mentioned you were going to interview someone at their house. Do you find you get a better interview or better material if you're face-to-face with that person?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for a profile piece, I don't think, no, I would never generally do it on Zoom or on the phone. I would do it face to face, especially for, a substantial piece.
Yeah.
I would always do it face to face. So yes, in the case of the author, I went to her house and up in Castlemaine, and we just sat by the fire and ate cakes and talked about her life for 2 hours. So it was great.
That's lovely.
I remember when I used to do a lot of those at home. They're really such a nice insight into that person.
Oh, absolutely.
So much color. You need to go to their house. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all the details are so telling, the books on their shelves, the paintings on the walls, and
where they work.
It gives you such rich color. And I think that's great. I don't know how I'd feel about someone coming to my house and seeing it in its natural state, but it's very generous, I think, if a interviewee lets you come to their house, because it makes for a much better profile, definitely.
Well, lucky we're just interviewing you on Zoom then.
Yeah, exactly.
You can hide all the stuff in a cupboard.
Piles of paperwork are on either side of the computer. That's right.
So I think the sort of writing you do is a bit of a dream for some people, those sort of wonderful, deep profile pieces. So do you have some tips for anything for somebody interested in that sort of feature writing, and maybe getting into this sort of work and that part of the business?
Yeah. It's probably even harder now because of the competition. But for people starting out, I think you've just got to write as many stories as you can, and then make sure you file really good, clean copy. And most of all, do not miss a deadline. I think editors, especially these days, are so busy that you have to make their jobs as easy as possible. And if you're responsive and easy to work with, then you're much more likely to be asked to write for them again.
Yeah.
Great tips. Oh, Susan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing, your career story with us. It's really been fascinating, and I just loved all the anecdotes of the people you've interviewed and everything.
No, that's fun. Thanks so much for having me. It's great.
So fun. Tell us where people can connect with you.
So many times on this podcast, I've heard you both say how essential it is to have a website. And I know it's true, especially if you want content marketing work, but I'm so ashamed to say I still haven't made a website. And
oh dear.
I think I know I'm ashamed. I am so ashamed. I think I'm just terrified of writing the about page. It's
Everyone
so
is
hard to write that. And I do have a site on author.com though, and that's got stories from the past few years. And I'm also on LinkedIn, so people can feel free to contact me there.
Oh, fantastic.
Great.
We'll put links in the show notes to both those places.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And thank you, Susan, so much for being our guest this week. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. It's so lovely to meet you, even via Zoom.
Yes.
And so that brings us to the end of the show this week. And thanks to everyone who's listening and sharing us and all the things. We get so many nice reviews, Rach, and our numbers keep going up. It's like we're 70,000 downloads now. It's very exciting.
Oh my God. How did that happen?
I don't know.
Congratulations. That's great.
Yes.
It's a big number.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll pop the show notes in the podcast app. So head there to find out more about where you can connect with Susan, and also where you can connect with us if you wanted to chat to us, and also to hear all about the Content Bite Summit.
Yeah, and I should say thanks again to our sponsors, rounded.com.au, because they're easy in accounting and invoicing software, and they're just made for Australian freelancers and sole traders. So go to rounded.com.au.
We will be back next week.
Next week, definitely. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.